step into an era of gentle sitcoms and starry-eyed big band success, a time when one man's easy-going persona charmed Americans from living rooms across the country. That man was Oswald George Ozzie Nelson, whose voice and saxophone once lit up dance halls during the Great Depression, and whose kindly TV dad facade shaped the adventures of Ozzie and Harriet, one of the longest-running family comedies in history. Yet the smiles and neighborly banter on screen only hinted at the ambition, business acumen, and behind-the-scenes devotion that powered his decades-long career. Beneath that image of a soft-spoken father figure, Ozzie orchestrated every aspect of his show, rewriting scripts, editing episodes, and subtly transforming his real-life family into America's favorite household. But behind the gentle illusions and comedic hustle lay a more sobering reality. In the final stretch of his life, Ozzie faced malignant tumors and an untimely battle with liver cancer that took him from beloved national fixture to a man saying farewell with Harriet and his sons by his side. Today we'll take a closer look at how Ozzie Nelson rose from the adversity of the Depression to dominate radio and TV, only to confront a tragic end that, for many fans, remains overshadowed by the optimism of his screen image. Stick around as we explore the surprising complexity and ultimate heartbreak behind the public myth of America's quintessential sitcom, Dad. Oswald George Ozzie Nelson was born on March 20th, 1906 in Jersey City, New Jersey, at a time when the United States stood on the brink of dramatic cultural and economic changes. His father, George Waldemar Nelson, came from Sweden, and his mother, Ethel Irene, boasted English descent, a blend of old-world traditions that would, in time, shape Ozzie's broad outlook on life. In the early years of his childhood, the Nelson family moved to Ridgefield Park, not too far from New York City. Growing up there, Ozzie developed a wide array of interests. He became a spirited participant in extracurriculars at Ridgefield Park High School, took a keen interest in football, and showed an unusual degree of curiosity for someone who was also musically inclined. He might have appeared just another American boy, but behind that ordinary facade was a relentless work ethic and a sharp mind that would prove vital in forging a far-reaching career in show business. At the tender age of 13, Ozzie was honored with the rank of Eagle Scout. At that time, he was believed to be the youngest individual to achieve this distinction, a testament not only to his leadership skills and moral compass, but also to the early seeds of discipline that would later guide his work as a bandleader, musician, actor, and eventual showrunner. By the mid-1920s, he had graduated from high school and enrolled at Rutgers University. While academics played a part in his life, especially his intention to study law, he was also a fixture on the college football team, combining physical prowess with intellectual pursuits. Rutgers' tradition of fraternities drew Ozzie in, and he joined the Cap and Skull Society, a local honor organization that recognized leadership and academic achievements. Football, fraternities, and scouting all showcased a side of Ozzie that was enthusiastic, physically active, and devoted to the tasks he took on. What the Great Depression would do, however, was reshape the paths of countless young Americans, including Ozzie. Before the nation's economy imploded in 1929, Ozzie had pictured himself possibly heading to law school and embarking on a stable legal career. Indeed, he spent time at Rutgers Law School after completing his undergraduate degree. But as the Depression took hold, job prospects for new lawyers dwindled, and many turned to whatever means they had to pay the bills. In Ozzie's case, that meant embracing music more fully than he might have anticipated. He'd already been dabbling in saxophone, playing at small gigs, picking up side money as a band member here or there, and serving as a football trainer on the side. Musical ability ran deep within him, perhaps overshadowed by his father's Swedish stoicism or mother's English practicalness, but it became a calling once opportunity demanded it. His early experiences with music also featured a dash of heartbreak and comedic frustration. Rutgers boasted its own jazz ensembles, but the existing group known as the Rutgers Jazz Bandits apparently rejected Ozzie from any starring vocal position, letting him only play sax. Still, he did not give up. Undeterred by that rejection, he cultivated his voice, absorbing the era's popular singers, eventually forging a style reminiscent of then superstar Rudy Vallee. This was more than a passing similarity. Ozzie had the physical likeness to Vallee, and at times, an eerily similar singing voice. In an America where radio was on the ascendant, a performer who reminded people of the famed crooner Rudy Vallee might find a fast track to national attention. And that's exactly what happened for Ozzie. During the early 1930s, as he concluded that the job market for lawyers was bleak, he made the leap to become a full-time musician, founding the Ozzie Nelson Band. Big band music was in its golden period, though overshadowed by legendary names like Benny Goodman, Tommy Dorsey, Glenn Miller, and others. Ozzie wanted to break through that crowded field, so he leveraged his resemblance to Vallee and also harnessed the collective efforts of the band itself. At times, the Ozzie Nelson Band would revolve membership or adopt special promotional stunts, always ensuring they exploited every angle to attract more fans. Among the band's earliest achievements was scoring gigs in and around the New York City area, from local dance halls to more prestigious venues. They took advantage of the blossoming phenomenon of national radio broadcasts, which allowed promising ensembles to beam music straight into living rooms across the nation, bridging the gap left by lack of live performance opportunities during the Depression years. One particularly vital milestone was the engagement at Glen Island Casino, famed for catapulting several big band leaders into national renown. Indeed, Glen Island was to big bands what certain iconic theaters were to Broadway musicals, a place that might well discover the next big name. By securing a spot at Glen Island Casino, Ozzie's group attracted radio coverage and got the ear of major label scouts. Soon, the band was cutting tracks for Brunswick, Vocalion, Victor, and Bluebird, establishing a modest discography that included songs like Over Somebody Else's Shoulder, which achieved a notable measure of popularity. However, unlike some of the more flamboyant band leaders of the day, Ozzie seemed content with a business-minded approach. He harnessed the impetus from band success into personal brand building, ensuring the band not only performed well, but also cultivated an identity that engaged fans, something close to 1930s brand marketing. This ability to keep an eye on the bigger picture, be it contract negotiations, radio presence, or record deals, served him well once he pivoted to a new medium, radio drama and comedy. A central figure in Ozzie's personal life and career was Harriet Hilliard, whom he married in 1935. Harriet, also a vocalist, joined Ozzie's band. Their chemistry on stage, blending Harriet's singing with Ozzie's leadership, enthralled audiences and effectively made them an all-in-one musical and marital partnership. Harriet, moreover, brought a witty presence that complemented Ozzie's more laid-back comedic personality. They enjoyed a wholesome image, something that would matter greatly once they made the jump to radio variety shows and later situational comedies. Indeed, the synergy of Ozzie and Harriet was an early example of a performing couple forging a brand identity that fans followed, similar in spirit to other comedic duos that would arise in mid-century America. By the early 1940s, Ozzie recognized that while big band music was still in demand, radio variety programs were surging. He capitalized on the idea of not just appearing as a band, but hosting comedic skits and sequences. In 1944, the show that would eventually become The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet debuted on radio. The premise at first was straightforward: Ozzie, Harriet, and comedic reenactments of family life, plus a bit of music. The couple's two sons, David, born 1936, and Eric, affectionately called Ricky, born 1940, would appear from time to time, although in the earliest episodes they were portrayed by child actors. The authenticity of a genuine family comedic show quickly grabbed attention. With so many Americans searching for comforting entertainment amidst wartime stress, The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet proved to be a balm. Harriet's quick wit, Ozzie's mild comedic confusion, and the show's gentle humor resonated with listeners, catapulting it to national fame. This synergy grew even stronger after the war. By the late 1940s, radio was in fierce competition with a newer medium, television. Families who loved their old favorite radio shows, like Fibber McGee and Molly, the Jack Benny Program, or The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet, often followed them onto TV. For Ozzie, the transition to television began in earnest in 1952 when The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet launched as a full-blown sitcom. David and Ricky now portrayed themselves on screen, removing the need for hired child actors and establishing a family-based comedic environment that arguably laid the blueprint for many subsequent family sitcoms. The show balanced comedic stories about daily life, maybe Harriet's friendly argument with Ozzie about home tasks, or David and Ricky's small adolescent troubles at school, and then ended with a feel-good resolution. Ozzie showed an impressive skill set in that era, functioning not just as the star but as the show's de facto showrunner. He took on the roles of producer, occasionally director, editor, and overall creative force, guided by an uncanny sense of what viewers wanted. He had a precise vision of how the comedic arc should unfold. Harriet, for her part, brought a sassy intelligence that balanced Ozzie's sometimes stammering father figure. Indeed, while Ozzie's on-camera persona was a bit befuddled, behind the scenes, he was an intense, disciplined presence. Many who worked with him marveled at his capacity for overseeing budgets, rewriting scripts, and meticulously editing episodes until they conveyed the right comedic tempo. These efforts paid off. The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet proved immensely popular, running for 14 seasons on ABC from 1952 to 1966. That longevity secured it as one of the longest-running family sitcoms in American television, overshadowing many contemporary series that flickered onto the screen for a few short years before vanishing. A major offshoot of this success was the spotlight it cast on younger son Ricky. By the late 1950s, Ricky Nelson had begun to exhibit talent as a pop singer, and Ozzie cleverly wove Ricky's musical performances into the fabric of the show. This cross-promotion synergy turned Ricky into a teen idol, with chart-topping hits like Poor Little Fool and Hello, Mary Lou. Audiences would tune in to see comedic family shenanigans, only for the episode to conclude with Ricky performing a new track. The phenomenon effectively turned the show into a launching pad for Ricky's rock and roll stardom, bridging the gap between the squeaky clean image of 1950s sitcoms and the rebellious fervor of teenage rock audiences. Ozzie's business savvy guided that endeavor too, ensuring the show's episodes skillfully integrated Ricky's rising pop star persona without overshadowing the rest of the family dynamic. During the 1960s, as other comedic series rose and fell, The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet kept going. Critics sometimes jested that the show's storylines became increasingly gentle and were slow to reflect the cultural shift of the mid-1960s. Still, loyal fans continued to watch, comforted by the same sense of normalcy that the original radio episodes had offered in the 1940s. By the time the show aired its last new episode in 1966, it had notched 435 episodes, a colossal figure for the era, dwarfed only by a handful of daytime soap operas or game shows. Meanwhile, Harriet, David, and Ricky all explored separate opportunities. Harriet occasionally guested on other programs. David took small film or TV roles. Ricky fully embraced his pop music career, eventually transitioning to a more country rock vibe in the 1970s. Ozzie, too, branched out. In 1973, after a 7-year gap from the original show, Ozzie's curiosity about new comedic angles manifested in a sequel series called Ozzie's Girls. The premise was that the family house, once home to their 2 now-grown sons, would host 2 college girls as lodgers. Ozzie and Harriet would find themselves adapting to the cultural differences between raising 2 boys and hosting these spirited young women. The comedic potential was strong, but the show, syndicated rather than on a major network, lasted only 1 season. Shifting times had perhaps moved beyond the mild comedic style that the adventures of Ozzie and Harriet epitomized, as edgier or more topical comedies like All in the Family had taken center stage. Nonetheless, Ozzie's Girl stands as his final fling at episodic TV, an attempt to keep pace with cultural shifts, if only briefly. Off-camera, Ozzie's health entered a slow decline. Friends and colleagues recall that for a man once so robust and actively engaged, whether directing comedic scenes or playing sports, his recurring malignant tumors came as a particularly cruel blow. Rumors circulated in the early 1970s that he was facing serious health battles, but Ozzie being Ozzie, he kept a stoic front. For some time, Harriet, David, and Ricky provided quiet support. Eventually, doctors diagnosed him with liver cancer. He received treatments at home in the San Fernando Valley, surrounded by the family who had once starred alongside him on radio and TV. On June 3, 1975, at 4:30 a.m., with Harriet and his sons by his side, Ozzie passed away at 69 years old, an early departure for someone who had given so much comedic delight to multiple generations. Services took place at the Church of the Hills at Forest Lawn, Hollywood Hills, California, on Friday, June 6th, and Ozzie was interred at that same cemetery, the site of many other show business legends. His passing evoked heartfelt tributes, but also a sense that an entire epoch of American family entertainment had drawn to a close. A giant of early radio, a pioneer in television sitcom, and an ever-present father figure to millions of viewers, Ozzie's legacy remains impressive, if sometimes under-acknowledged. The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet stands as a precursor to the countless family sitcoms that followed, including the more modern era of multi-camera or single-camera comedic households. His comedic approach, lean, gentle, lightly moral, deeply influenced shows like Leave It to Beaver and Father Knows Best, even if those series had their own distinct touches. For his considerable impact on the television industry, Ozzie Nelson holds a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, 6555 Hollywood Boulevard. He and Harriet share another star at 6260 Hollywood Boulevard for their contribution to radio, reminding passers-by that long before streaming series or cable channels, Ozzie and Harriet captured hearts via the radio waves. Even if younger generations now primarily remember Ricky Nelson's pop hits or Harriet's wisecracking persona, it was Ozzie who systematically built the comedic empire that sustained them all. History can sometimes overshadow the efforts of men like Ozzie, whose off-screen achievements, managing, editing, supervising, are less flashy than others. Nonetheless, glimpses into production notes from The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet reveal how hands-on Ozzie was with scripts, set design, comedic timing, and the integration of musical numbers for Ricky. Essentially, Ozzie juggled the roles of writer, showrunner, and father figure on camera, bridging family reality with comedic narratives. Harriet often joked in interviews that Ozzie's calm, stammering dad character was the polar opposite of who he really was, a meticulous craftsman who counted pennies and demanded repeated takes until comedic perfection emerged. An interesting side note from old interview scraps: Ozzie apparently believed in hiring local teenage employees to help with stagehand tasks, giving them a small rung on the ladder of showbiz. Some of these teen crew members later recounted how Ozzie's hustle and attention to detail inspired them to pursue a career in television production. In ways subtle and overt, Ozzie functioned not just as a comedic star, but also as a teacher behind the scenes, guiding novices on how to operate cameras, arrange lighting, or fix continuity errors. This mirrored the paternal role he presented on screen, though in real life it included a more hard-nosed business sense. In the years since his death, Harriet survived him until 1994, passing away at age 85. David, who was more private, did some directing and producing, while Ricky tragically died in a plane crash on December 31st, 1985. The entire Nelson family thus faced heartbreak after heartbreak, which in many ways contrasted with the rosy illusions of their comedic show. Yet fans who rewatch old episodes see an idealized 1950s suburban universe, an image that continues to shape how people imagine mid-century American life. In that idealization, Ozzie's role stands out. He was both father figure and comedic engine, bridging American family tradition with gentle punchlines and a safe, stable home environment. It can be easy in our era of irony and sophisticated dramedy to poke fun at the dryness or innocence of a show like The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet. But in its day, it was revolutionary. Families craved the authenticity of seeing a real couple and their real kids, bridging radio and television so intimately that the line between reality and fiction often blurred. Listeners on the radio or viewers on ABC were left to guess, are Ozzie and Harriet just like this in real life? Are their comedic misunderstandings real? The answer was complicated. Harriet once said, "We might not solve every family argument in 22 minutes, but there's a kernel of truth in each comedic storyline." And behind each storyline was Ozzie, rewriting or refining jokes to ensure that by the time Harriet said her last wry remark, audiences at home felt a sense of warm closure. Even beyond the family show, Ozzie popped up in cameo roles across other comedic or dramatic anthologies. For instance, he guested on Adam 12 in the late 1960s, an unusual shift for viewers used to seeing him in a paternal comedic context. He also appeared in an episode of Night Gallery, the Rod Serling anthology, which gave him a chance to demonstrate dramatic acting. While neither cameo overshadowed his main comedic legacy, they helped preserve his presence in the evolving TV landscape of the late 60s and early 70s. Then came Ozzie's Girls, a final fling at syndicated family comedy, with Harriet by his side. The premise acknowledged that David and Ricky were grown, but Ozzie still wanted to test new comedic waters. That the show only lasted a year might reflect changing times. By the mid-1970s, the comedic sensibilities had shifted toward more socially conscious or edgy fare, like All in the Family or MASH. The gentle 1950s style that Ozzie championed was no longer in vogue. Still, that final series remains a curious footnote in the Nelson story. One cannot overlook, in a broader cultural sense, how the adventures of Ozzie and Harriet contributed to the myth of American suburban life. Countless references exist in modern pop culture mocking the so-called Ozzie and Harriet style parenting or illusions. People sometimes quip, "This isn't Ozzie and Harriet," as a shorthand for our domestic life is far from perfect. Indeed, the brand was so ubiquitous that even in the 21st century, one can find new viewers picking up DVD sets or streaming reruns on niche channels, marveling at the black and white comedic rhythm that, ironically, shaped the formula for later family sitcoms like Father Knows Best, Leave It to Beaver, or the early seasons of The Donna Reed Show. And Ozzie, for all his behind-the-scenes labor, seldom placed his own face in front of huge promotional campaigns. He was content to let Harriet and the kids share the spotlight, a quiet humility that mirrored the father role he played on camera. In summation, Oswald George Ozzie Nelson stands as a pioneer on multiple fronts. He began as a big band leader, leveraging the Great Depression's tough times to push his music career forward. He soared in that capacity, tapping into national radio and forging a name with Harriet. When comedic variety programs gained traction, he pivoted to that arena, founding The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet on radio, then on television, making it a beloved institution that lasted over 2 decades from its radio inception to its final TV episodes. Along the way, he shaped the comedic arcs of his sons, launched Ricky Nelson's musical stardom, and provided Harriet a national stage for her quick wit. He was a man of that transitional era, bridging Depression-era big band culture, 1940s radio, 1950s classic sitcoms, and 1970s syndicated experiments. His relentless behind-the-scenes efforts, arranging, producing, directing, writing, reflected a business acumen seldom matched by many of his contemporaries. And even as the comedic father figure on the show seemed mild, stammering, or absent-minded, real-life Ozzie was a meticulous, unstoppable force who shaped American pop culture more than many realize. He succumbed to liver cancer at age 69 on June 3, 1975, at home in the San Fernando Valley. Though that might seem a tragic or abrupt ending in a broader sense, Ozzie's legacy was sealed long before. His comedic style, paternal presence, entrepreneurial approach to the family brand, and decades-long synergy with Harriet are woven into the fabric of mid-century American entertainment. He's buried at Forest Lawn Hollywood Hills, the final resting place for so many Hollywood luminaries. His star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame at 6555 Hollywood Boulevard, plus a joint star with Harriet at 6260, serve as physical symbols of a major comedic figure, one who was ahead of his time in cross-media synergy and brand identity. Indeed, few have guided a single comedic concept from big band success into radio, then adapted the same comedic formula for a groundbreaking TV sitcom, all while launching a teen idol phenomenon in their own household. Though overshadowed in modern memory by more rebellious or boundary-pushing comedic styles that came later, the life story of Oswald George Ozzie Nelson exemplifies an unwavering determination, a certain flair for self-promotion, and an earnest brand of humor that left a lasting imprint on American entertainment. His rise began inconspicuously in a time of profound national hardship, the Great Depression, yet he managed to thrive by transforming what began as a modest skill set, playing saxophone and singing, into a path toward national recognition. By leveraging his big band success, he stepped into the quickly evolving worlds of radio and eventually television, mediums that he recognized early on could link families and communities through story, warmth, and comedic relief. Crucially, Harriet Hilliard, later Harriet Nelson, served not just as Ozzie's partner in domestic life, but as a creative force who added sparkle and wit to their stage and on-air collaborations. The comedic synergy between them fueled both the success of their band performances in the 1930s and 1940s, and the later comedic narrative at the heart of The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet, first on radio and then on television. It was Harriet's warm, wisecracking presence that balanced Ozzie's easygoing, somewhat absent-minded persona. On screen, the interplay between them sold the notion of a natural, relatable couple tackling everyday problems. Yet behind the scenes, Ozzie held complete command of the production, from story arcs to rehearsal schedules, weaving each detail into a carefully controlled operation meant to evoke spontaneity. The illusions of a seamless nuclear household sprang from scripts, often penned or reworked by Ozzie himself, yet the closeness of their actual family gave the performances a unique sincerity. By the time viewers met the real David and Ricky Nelson in the TV version of The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet, there was already a decade of radio synergy making the dynamic appear as if they truly lived in that comedic narrative. Audiences felt they knew them intimately, inviting these neighbors into their homes each week. In an era searching for post-World War II stability, the Nelson family captured a snapshot of gentle domestic life, minor conflicts, mild mistakes, and a father who might stammer or procrastinate, but ultimately stepped up to restore order. The result was a reassuring sense of normalcy. Of course, the polished picture omitted the laborious grind behind every episode. Ozzie spent countless hours editing voice recordings, matching comedic beats, and ensuring the brand name, Ozzie and Harriet, stood for warmth and comedic reliability. Scripts went through multiple drafts until Ozzie was convinced each laugh would hit at precisely the right moment. He approached his comedic brand with a rigor more commonly associated with high-end drama. Harriet, too, brought her own comedic experience from her years performing as a vocalist and actress. Their sons, David and Ricky, were effectively raised within a pop culture bubble. David approached it with careful modesty, while Ricky discovered a musical talent that Ozzie, the perennial promoter, folded neatly into the show. This synergy was more than a gimmick. It tapped into the widespread American enthusiasm for teen idols. Audiences watching The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet could see Ricky casually performing a new track at the end of an episode, and then that record might climb the pop charts. Such business acumen served as a template for future family brands in television, from the Brady Bunch to modern-day reality programs about entire households. What Ozzie and Harriet pioneered was a collision between the private sphere, parents raising their actual children, and the polished comedic sphere of scripted entertainment. It was far more seamless than similar radio or TV families of the day, partly because the Nelsons portrayed themselves, narrowing the gap between reality and fiction. At times, viewers genuinely believed they were glimpsing unscripted glimpses of the real Ozzie, Harriet, David, and Ricky in their day-to-day lives. Journalists of that era published articles speculating on whether the household drama viewers witnessed each week accurately reflected the domestic routine on Camino Palmero Street, the fictional home address in the show. What made this brand all the more remarkable was how Ozzie's comedic image as a mild, dithering father sharply contrasted with his commanding off-camera persona. Many who worked with him remarked that he was indefatigable. If a scene failed to convey its comedic potential, Ozzie would rewrite lines on the spot, or reorder scenes in post-production until the pace felt correct. Though Harriet occasionally teased him about being a workaholic, she conceded it was that relentless drive that maintained the show's consistent tone. Some cast and crew members from the 1960s recall Ozzie reviewing the day's dailies late into the night, making marginal notes about comedic beats, adjusting story continuity, and conferring with the show's editor to ensure the comedic wave crest lined up precisely with the laugh track. In a sense, the paternal figure who overcame the Great Depression's adversity was still present, ensuring that each comedic scenario was handled with the same discipline that once propelled him through scouting achievements in college football. On the surface, the dynamic might appear strictly nostalgic, a rose-tinted window to a 1950s America that didn't address deeper social tensions. Indeed, the adventures of Ozzie and Harriet rarely tackled hot-button issues like civil rights, the Cold War, or second-wave feminism. By design, Ozzie curated the show's comedic arcs around universal family foibles, lost gloves, dinner mishaps, teen embarrassment, gentle neighborly feuds. Critics in the 1960s sometimes jabbed the show for feeling out of touch, especially as rock and roll, the youth counterculture, and the Vietnam War began dominating the public conscience. But for many viewers who switched on ABC each week, the show's innocence wasn't a flaw. It was a welcome relief from the existential anxiety swirling outside the living room. Ozzie was well aware of this dynamic. Privately, he admitted the show's success hinged on delivering a comedic oasis for average families, not shocking them with cutting-edge commentary. Meanwhile, Harriet's subtle wisecracks and easy laughter made her a comedic foil that occasionally overshadowed Ozzie. Harriet had a grounded, unruffled style that balanced the otherwise whimsical or paternal comedic approach. She could dish out retorts reminiscent of classic 1930s comedies. In interviews given in later years, Harriet stressed that the show's synergy came from deep mutual respect. Ozzie might have final say, but we built jokes together. We both knew what kept the viewers from changing the channel. Over time, Harriet also took a greater role behind the scenes, collaborating on production decisions, fine-tuning her comedic timing, and ensuring the scripts did justice to a real American mother figure. This balance, with Harriet's comedic chops at the center, helped the show remain relevant far longer than many believed it would. Ricky's rise to teen idol status, propelled by the show's synergy, underscored Ozzie's gift for brand management. Even though Ozzie never forced Ricky to perform, he recognized that the boy's budding talent could feed a new dimension of comedic arcs. The comedic setup often hinged on Ozzie resisting or misunderstanding youth culture, while Harriet took a more motherly approach and Ricky soared on stage in the show's final minutes, singing for a TV audience who would soon buy his records. Over time, this synergy gave the adventures of Ozzie and Harriet a unique niche. It was part domestic sitcom, part teen rock and roll showcase. Record executives marveled at how Ozzie bridged these seemingly disparate realms. Yet behind the celebratory success, some tension simmered. By the mid-1960s, David and Ricky were grown adults craving independence. Harriet, too, recognized that the unstoppable comedic machine was overshadowing real familial transitions. The final official season aired in 1966, with new episodes taping until the show's demise. While some fans lamented that the family dynamic started feeling contrived, David and Ricky were well into their 20s, living outside the nest on screen from time to time. Others still found comfort in each gentle comedic exploit. Even after ABC officially ended the series, Ozzie considered spin-offs or retools. He eventually produced Ozzie's Girls in 1973, slotting the concept into local syndication. Harriet reprised her role, but it was clear that the comedic style of the 1970s had evolved. Shows like All in the Family were tackling generational conflict and social upheaval. Ozzie's Girls, by contrast, stuck to breezy comedic misunderstandings about renting out the boys' old room to two college girls. While it lasted a single season and offered a final hurrah for Ozzie's comedic brand, it couldn't compete with more daring sitcoms of the day. In these final years, Ozzie wrestled with recurring malignant tumors that would claim his life by 1975. Harriet, David, and Ricky stood vigil as he fought. This narrative, far removed from the comedic illusions of fatherly bumbling, underscores the resilience that had been there all along. He passed away at the age of 69 in their San Fernando Valley home. Harriet remained by his side along with their sons, a familial closeness reminiscent of the fictional scenario they had performed for decades. The funeral saw an outpouring of respect from fans, industry peers, and even younger sitcom creators who recognized Ozzie's pioneering role in shaping the family sitcom template. Harriet herself lived until 1994, a quiet final chapter that let her see how, even after Ozzie's death, the show's syndicated reruns continued bridging generational gaps, introducing 1950s comedic tones to new watchers. David and Ricky also faced transformations. David delved into directing and behind-the-scenes production, while Ricky soared in the 1950s and 60s as a teenage rock star, then found a second wave in the 1970s embracing country rock influences, only to tragically die in a plane crash at the close of 1985. By that point, Harriet had endured the sorrow of losing both her husband and younger son, though fans might recall them eternally alive on black and white sets. Rewatchers of The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet often reflect on how the 435-episode run outlasted the phenomenon that gave it birth, showcasing an unwavering comedic calm that spanned from radio days through significant historical events. World War II, the Korean War, the Civil Rights Movement, and the dawn of color television. In its own gentle comedic style, it bore witness to the evolution of mainstream America. For all the newer comedic traditions that overshadowed Ozzie's style, ranging from edgy observational humor to biting socio-political satire, his approach remains valuable, its comedic warmth anchored in empathy. The illusions might have been partly contrived, but they carried an emotional honesty. Audiences wanted to see a father who made jokes with a soft stammer, a mother who bantered lovingly, and two sons who navigated mild teenage problems. Today, critics may find it too tame, but in an era beset by war memories, economic rebounds, and growing suburban sprawl, it provided a comedic sphere for families to imagine themselves. Stable, supportive, and always ready with a witty line or a new song. Considering the era, Ozzie's methods for melding personal and professional were as groundbreaking as they come. He effectively invented a comedic brand that had multiple revenue streams: radio sponsorships, television deals, music royalties, especially from Ricky's songs, and merchandise tied to the show. That synergy looks commonplace now, but 70 or 80 years ago, it was a risk-laden experiment. Another subtle innovation was the pacing of comedic arcs, which Ozzie regulated meticulously to ensure they appealed to both older radio-era fans and the younger, post-war generation. Harriet's comedic instincts eased that bridging. Her comedic timing matched or surpassed Ozzie's. The boys had front-row seats to comedic genius, absorbing not just lines, but the entire interplay of comedic setups. Ricky, in particular, gleaned a flair for showmanship that, combined with genuine musical talent, launched a rock and roll phenomenon. In analyzing Ozzie's comedic impulses, one can see parallels to older vaudeville traditions, in which comedic sketches, a bit of music, and heartwarming banter were all juggled by one or two central figures. Ozzie, raised during an era when vaudeville was fading, must have recognized the synergy that variety-style production, could have once transposed into radio and then adapted into a more narrative sitcom approach. The friendly bantering style, spliced with a mild comedic problem each episode, echoes vaudeville's playful comedic conflicts. Harriet's background as a singer, combined with her comedic wit, mirrored the dynamic of those stage couples who had both a comedic and a musical element in their act. Hence, the illusions of a perfect nuclear household on the adventures of Ozzie and Harriet can be read, partly, as an updated extension of America's older comedic traditions, only with a new overlay of suburban calm. The comedic synergy was grounded in the real love between Ozzie and Harriet, but the way it manifested on air was an artful performance, honed by rewrites, carefully rehearsed comedic mistakes, and genuine comedic interplay. That is the brand Ozzie meticulously built and that Harriet passionately fostered alongside him, bridging personal closeness with performance illusions in a manner that prefigured later reality-based programming. And so, though overshadowed by comedic evolutions that introduce sharper satire, more brazen characters, or socially subversive content, Ozzie Nelson remains an architect of the comforting comedic sphere. His story underscores the potential for a single figure, scout, band leader, comedic father, behind-the-scenes producer, to shape an iconic comedic brand bridging mid-century American anxieties and the blossoming of suburban optimism. Many comedic historians point to him as the glue that held the entire operation together, from record deals to TV negotiations, to ensuring Harriet's comedic lines sparkled. Without Ozzie's unwavering devotion to detail, the adventures of Ozzie and Harriet could easily have faded as another ephemeral 1950s curiosity. Instead, it soared into the record books with one of the longest runs in primetime sitcom history. Thus, while it might be easy to dismiss the illusions or overshadow them with rebellious comedic movements that came after, whether Lenny Bruce's envelope-pushing stand-up or Saturday Night Live's later irreverent sketches, Ozzie's comedic impulses responded to the desires of an entire generation who craved stability, warmth, and mild domestic humor. This is ultimately why his brand of comedic synergy endures in memory. It formed a bulwark of continuity, bridging the big band era to the multi-camera sitcom, bridging old-time radio traditions to the early network television age, bridging personal family life to fictional comedic arcs. All those bridges, spun from Ozzie's discipline, Harriet's charm, David's directorial bent, and Ricky's musical flair, carved out a space in American pop culture that still resonates for scholars of television history, casual fans of comfort TV, and even modern audiences exploring classic comedic genealogies. No illusions can conceal that heartbreak eventually came. David grew up to witness a more adult entertainment scene that overshadowed the gentle comedic tradition. Ricky soared as a teen idol, then faced the tribulations of adulthood in show business, culminating in a tragic plane crash. Harriet, once the breezy comedic foil, outlived both her husband and her younger son, grappling with grief behind closed doors. Still, the show's reruns broadcast illusions of cheerful domestic bliss long after tragedy befell the real family. The comedic synergy remained etched in black and white frames, testifying to a moment in American culture that found reassurance in mild fatherly stammers and maternal zingers, all guided by a behind-the-scenes maestro who refused to settle for anything less than comedic neatness. Whether one calls that escapism or a reflection of simpler times, it's a testament to how Ozzie's brand shaped a national consciousness about family sitcoms. Even decades on, Hollywood acknowledges Ozzie's achievements through a star on the Walk of Fame, marking not just his comedic front-facing image, but the behind-the-scenes mastery that turned day-to-day life into a comedic tapestry. And if modern comedic watchers remark that 1950s era illusions of perfection no longer hold sway, the fact remains. Ozzie's comedic illusions offered a gentle, safe space for families amid the uncertainties of post-war America, bridging cultural shifts, launching a teen idol phenomenon, and pioneering the notion that a real family could also be America's comedic family. That synergy is precisely what makes Ozzie Nelson's legacy more profound than it might initially appear, ensuring that even in the swirl of comedic evolutions that overshadowed his style, one cannot truly disentangle the subsequent wave of family sitcom success from the gentle comedic foundation he laid. Ozzie's final years marred by illness also showed he never truly lost his desire to keep creating, as evidenced by Ozzie's Girls. In a swiftly changing comedic universe, he sought ways to remain relevant. The series didn't last, but it remains a curious coda to a storied career. Ultimately, for all the mild laughs or gentle domestic scrapes that the adventures of Ozzie and Harriet showcased, the real story behind Ozzie is one of unstoppable resilience. Starting as an underappreciated vocalist in a college band, rejected by the Rutgers Jazz Bandits, he catapulted himself via big band mania into national recognition, then pivoted to comedic radio sketches, and ended up pioneering one of the longest-running sitcoms in American history. Along the way, he influenced how audiences perceive the family in American media, making it less alien for show business families to appear as themselves, something reality TV would take to extremes in later decades. Today, Ozzie Nelson's name might not ring as loudly as Lucille Ball, Desi Arnaz, or Jackie Gleason, but his lasting influence on comedic domesticity, cross-media stardom, and the potential synergy of family members in a single brand resonates through countless derivative works. That he accomplished all of this while maintaining a fatherly persona on screen and a sharp showrunner mindset off-screen only amplifies the significance of his contributions. His star on the Walk of Fame stands as a reminder that behind each mild comedic father role can lie a fierce production genius, attuned to the possibilities of every new medium. In this sense, the sad ending of Ozzie Nelson's life, succumbing to cancer, does not define the narrative. Instead, what stands out is the decades of near-constant creativity, the bridging of big band music to comedic television, and the fatherly presence that transcended generational divides. Even after his death, reruns of The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet continued to air, and Ricky's own stardom as a musician ensured that the Nelson name carried on in popular culture. Later, comedic or variety shows referencing 1950s nostalgia inevitably pay homage to the gentle comedic realms that Ozzie built. Thanks to a wealth of archived radio recordings, TV episodes, and personal interviews, historians and fans can glean a vivid sense of how determined and innovative Ozzie was, quietly guiding each comedic beat. He stammered on camera as the amiable dad, but behind the scenes was that unstoppable visionary who had once outmaneuvered the economic ruins of the Depression, overcame the overshadowing presence of bigger band leaders, and ultimately crafted an intimate comedic brand still recognized to this day.